Hello and welcome. In this video segment we will explore some of the different methods for constructing lines. Now as you look at the screen, the x-axis is from left to right and the y-axis is laying vertically on the screen and the z-axis is pointing straight at you. Now the origin, our x0, y0, z0, is positioned at the center of the grid. Now I'm going to create a 3x3 square where the first two lines I'll create using line endpoint, and for the second two lines I'll use line parallel. So let's get started. Going to move into create line and number one on the list, create line endpoint. Now I'm prompted on the screen to specify the first endpoint and the line endpoint ribbon bar opens up. Now to satisfy this first prompt I'm going to move to the center of the grid and there's my visual cue that allows me to snap to the origin x0, y0, z0. So I'm going to pick that point. Now the prompt changes to specify the second endpoint. So I'm going to move on up to the auto cursor ribbon bar and what I'm going to do is click in the space for x. I'm going to input 0 and then hit tab, and for the y value I'm going to input 3 and then hit tab one more time. Now I'm not going to change the z, going to leave that at 0 and hit the tab key one more time. So there's our first line, looks good. Just going to slide over to the right and click on apply to fix this entity. Now for the prompt, specify the first endpoint. So what I'm going to do is move on down, and as I get close to the endpoint of the line there's my visual cue for endpoint. So I'm going to pick this point. The prompt changes, specify the second endpoint. So I'm going to go up on the auto cursor ribbon bar. This time I'm going to click on fast point, and what I'm going to do is input the x and y coordinates for the endpoint of this line. 3 is the x, then I'm going to put in a comma to separate the x from the y, and for the y 3 as well, and then hit enter. So there's our second line. Looks good. Now I'm done here. I'm going to move on out of create line endpoint, so just going to slide over to the right and click on the OK button. Let's get back into create line, and for those last two lines what I'm going to do is use create line parallel. Now I'm prompted to select a line and the ribbon bar shows up. I'm going to pick this line, this vertical line. Now the prompt changes to select the point to place a parallel line through. I'm just going to pick a point here. Now before we move on I'm going to go up and on the ribbon bar click in the space for distance and input a value of 3. Now before I apply and fix this entity, over on the left hand side of the ribbon bar I'm going to click on the flip button and it flips it over the other side of the line. I'm going to flip one more time and we end up with a line on the left and the right. I'm just going to hit flip one more time and that's exactly what I'm after. So I'm going to hit the apply button now. Now for the next line, select a line. I'm going to pick this line here. I'm going to pick a point here. This time I'm going to open up the drop down for distance, pick 3 and then hit enter. Looks good, so we're done here. I'm going to pick on OK. Now I'm going to do a few undos, 1, 2, 3, 4 undos. I'm going to create that square again and create it slightly differently. Now before we went into create line endpoint, over on the toolbar, the sketcher toolbar, what I can do is open up this drop down and there's all our different line functions. I'm going to click create line endpoint and I'm prompted to specify the first endpoint. So I'm going to move down to the center of the grid, and as we did before there's the visual cue for the origin. I'm going to pick this point. I'm prompted to specify the second endpoint. Before we move on, what I'm going to do is over on the left hand side I'm going to click on the multi-line button. Now multi-line lets you create multiple lines connected at their endpoints. You can enter a point for the first endpoint of the first line and then a point for the second endpoint of the line. That second point becomes the first endpoint of the next line that you create. So back to this prompt, specify the second endpoint. I'm going to move on up and click on fast point. I'm going to input 0 for the X, comma, and 3 for the Y, and hit enter. Now notice the prompt, specify the second endpoint. Now for the next line, I'm going to do something slightly different. I'm going to go up to the ribbon bar, and I'm going to click in the space for length and pick 3. Now I'm going to hit the tab, and for the angle I'm going to input 0 and then hit enter. And there's our second line, created that slightly different than before. Now specify the second endpoint. What I'm going to do is on the autocursor ribbon bar, I'm going to open up the drop down for X. I'm going to pick 3, I'm going to hit tab, I'm going to open up the drop down for Y, and for the Y value 0. Going to hit tab one more time. The Z I'm not going to change, going to leave that at 0. Hit tab, there's our third line, looks good. We're prompted to specify the second endpoint, and what I'm going to do is, there's my visual cue for the endpoint. I'm just going to pick this point. Looks good, we're done here, going to pick OK. Now let's go back into create line. Let's check out some other methods of creating lines. Let's take a look at create line bisect. Now up on the graphic screen we're prompted to select 2 lines to bisect. The ribbon bar appears, and over on the left hand side we've got one solution activated, and just next door I'm going to activate 4 solutions. Now back to this prompt on the screen, select 2 lines to bisect. So what I'm going to do is pick this line and this line, and then the prompt changes to select which line to keep. I'm going to pick this one. I'm going to apply this. Looks good. Now over on the left of the ribbon bar, I'm going to activate 1 solution. Now back to this prompt, 2 lines to bisect. I'm going to pick this line and this line, and we just get 1 solution. Now before I hit apply, what I'm going to do is for the length I'm going to change that to 1 and then hit enter. As you can see, this line bisects these 2 lines and it's 1 inch long. So we're done here. Going to click on OK. Let's go back into create line, and number 2 on the list, create line closest. Now this creates a line between 2 entities at the closest intersection. So what I'm going to do is move on down and pick this horizontal line at the bottom, and I'm just going to move on up and pick this line. And what it does, it creates a line between the 2 entities at the closest intersection. Let's move on over to the MRU. Now the MRU stands for most recently used, and the last function I used was create line closest. I'm going to pick it again. Now I'm prompted to select line, arc or spline. I'm going to pick this line. I'm just going to slide over to the left and pick this line here. And there's our line. Looks good. I'm going to do a couple of undos and get rid of those 2 lines. Let's go into create line, and let's check out create line perpendicular. Now the ribbon bar appears, and I'm prompted to select line, arc or spline. Now what I'm going to do is pick this bottom line, this horizontal line at the bottom. Now sketch a point. What I'm going to do is move on up and pick the end point of that line we created earlier, and that's perpendicular line. Everything's looking good. Going to click on OK. What I'm doing is hitting the up key, the up arrow on my keyboard, and I'm just hitting the right arrow key on my keyboard. What we're going to do now is check out how we can create some lines tangent to these 2 circles. So what I'm going to do is up on the Sketcher toolbar, I'm going to open it up and I'm going to pick create line endpoint. Now I'm prompted to specify the first endpoint, and on the ribbon bar on the right hand side, tangent is activated. So to satisfy this first prompt, I'm going to pick this circle here. I'm going to slide on down and pick it here. Looks good. Going to hit apply. Let's put in another line tangent to these two circles. So I'm going to pick the circle here and then slide on down and pick the circle. Looks good. I'm going to do a couple of undos. Let's open up Create again. Let's go into Line and Tangent through Point. Now what I'm going to do first of all, on the ribbon bar, I'm going to click in the space for length and I'm going to change it to 2. I'm also going to click on the icon for length to lock it in. Now back to this prompt on the screen, select an arc or spline. I'm going to go and pick this circle on the right, and the prompt changes to select a tangent point on the arc or spline, first endpoint. So what I'm going to do is pick a point at the top of this circle, and this is the visual cue for quadrant. So I've picked it. Now the prompt changes, select which line to keep. I'm going to pick this line on the left hand side and apply it. Let's do another one. So select an arc or spline. I'm going to pick the circle. When prompted to pick a point, I'm going to pick a point here, and once again I'm prompted to select which line to keep. I'm going to pick this line here. Looks good. I'm going to pick OK. I'm going to do a couple of undos. Let's go back into Create Line Endpoint again. I'm going to click on the icon on the toolbar for Create Line Endpoint. Now I'm prompted to specify the first endpoint, and just a reminder, on the ribbon bar, tangent is activated. Now over on the left of the screen, I'm going to click on this point. There's my visual cue for point. I'm going to pick this point, and now when prompted for the second point, I'm going to move on down and pick this arc. Looks good. I'm going to hit apply. Prompt changes, specify the first endpoint. I'm going to pick this point. There's my visual cue for point. Just going to slide up and pick this circle. Looks good. I'm done. Going to click OK. Now that finishes up our excursion of creating lines. Thanks for watching.